The Unseen Grandson, Chapter 1, The Echo of a Dream, Coastal Maine, 2024. The perpetual sigh of the Atlantic Ocean was Evelyn Moore's most constant companion, a rhythmic backdrop to her solitary existence. At 70, she had long ago retreated into the quiet confines of her cliffside home, overlooking the rugged beauty of the Maine coast. The salty air, the mournful cry of gulls, the endless expanse of the sea, they were all reflections of her inner world, vast, untamed, and profoundly lonely. Her solitude wasn't a choice, not entirely. It was a consequence, a heavy cloak, woven from the threads of an unimaginable grief. Years ago, her son, Daniel, had been taken from her, swiftly, mercilessly, by the indifferent currents of the very ocean that now lulled her to sleep. Daniel's death had been a cleaving event, splitting her life into a sharp before and an unbearable after. It had also shattered her relationship with her daughter, Sarah, who in her own raw agony had lashed out, blaming Evelyn for 1,000 unspoken transgressions. The chasm between them had widened with each passing year, until it became an impassable gulf. Evelyn rarely spoke to Sarah, knew almost nothing of her life, certainly nothing of her personal choices, her relationships, her children. She suspected Sarah had built a life far away from her, a life Evelyn had no part in. One night, the ocean's gentle murmur gave way to a different sound, a child's laughter, echoing in the vivid landscape of her dreams. Evelyn found herself on the familiar stretch of beach below her house, the same jagged rocks, the same crashing waves. But she wasn't alone. A small boy, no older than 8, was there, his slender frame silhouetted against the dazzling morning sun. He had eyes of an astonishing, piercing blue, the color of the deepest part of the ocean, and a shock of sandy brown hair that caught the light. He laughed, a pure, uninhibited sound, as he chased a retreating wave, his small hands outstretched. "Grandma," he called out, his voice clear as a bell, his face lighting up with a radiant smile as he turned towards her. "Look what I found!" Evelyn, in the dream, felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest, a profound sense of love and connection that had been absent from her life for so long. She knelt, her arms open, and the boy ran into them, his small body a comforting weight, his scent of salt and sunshine filling her senses. She held him close, her heart overflowing with a tenderness she hadn't known she still possessed. The feeling was so real, so tangible, it brought tears to her eyes even in sleep. She woke abruptly, the image of the boy, his piercing blue eyes, and the sound of his laughter still echoing in the quiet bedroom. The warmth in her chest lingered, a ghost of the profound love she had felt. It wasn't just a dream, it was an experience, vivid and intensely emotional. She sat up, her mind racing. A grandson? But Sarah had never mentioned children, never mentioned a husband. Evelyn tried to rationalize it away. Loneliness, perhaps. A subconscious yearning for a connection she no longer believed she deserved. A figment of her imagination, conjured by the quiet desperation of her solitude. She dismissed it as a fleeting fantasy, a cruel trick of her subconscious. But the image of the boy, his bright eyes, his joyful laugh, stubbornly refused to fade. It was a prophecy, a whisper from the unseen, a profound disruption to the carefully constructed quietude of her life. The dream had been too real, too powerful to simply ignore. It was an echo of a life she didn't know existed, and a terrifying premonition of a connection she didn't know she was capable of forming. Chapter 2. The Widening Chasm. The vivid dream of the unseen grandson lingered in Evelyn's mind, an unshakable presence. She tried to push it away, to dismiss it as a product of her isolated existence, but its emotional resonance clung to her like the persistent Maine fog. That intense feeling of love, of connection, it was alien to her now. A phantom limb of a past she'd buried deep. Her life, for the past 2 decades, had been defined by absence. Daniel's death, a cruel accident at sea during a sudden, violent storm, had ripped through their family like a hurricane. He was only 22, full of life, a natural artist with a laugh that could fill a room. Evelyn had loved him with a ferocity that in her grief she had come to see as a flaw, a vulnerability that had been brutally exploited by fate. Sarah, her daughter, had been 19 at the time, already volatile, fiercely independent. Daniel was her older brother, her protector, her anchor. His death had broken something fundamental within her. In her raw, unchanneled grief, Sarah had turned on Evelyn, blaming her for everything and nothing. "You should have stopped him. You let him go out there," she'd screamed, her eyes blazing with a mixture of pain and accusation. "You always cared more about him anyway." The accusations, born of Sarah's own unimaginable sorrow, had pierced Evelyn's heart, exacerbating her own crushing guilt. Evelyn, in her profound numbness, had offered no defense, no comfort. She simply retreated, pulling inward, letting the silence swallow her. Sarah, unable to penetrate her mother's grief-stricken shell, had eventually left. Not with a dramatic farewell, but a slow, agonizing drift away. First to college in California, then a series of jobs in different states, each move further severing the fragile threads between them. Their calls became infrequent, stilted, filled with unspoken recriminations and awkward silences. Evelyn rarely initiated contact, Sarah even less so. Evelyn knew Sarah was living somewhere in the Midwest now, perhaps Chicago, but the details were vague, deliberately so on Sarah's part. Evelyn never asked about Sarah's relationships, her life, and Sarah never volunteered anything. It was a truce of silence, a painful agreement to exist in separate universes. Evelyn's days were a monotonous cycle of routine. She walked the beach, collecting shells, her gaze fixed on the horizon, searching for answers the ocean never provided. She read, losing herself in the lives of fictional characters, a stark contrast to the emptiness of her own. Her only consistent visitor was Martha, a kind, elderly neighbor who brought casseroles and quiet companionship, her presence a gentle reminder that Evelyn wasn't entirely forgotten. Martha, however, respected Evelyn's boundaries, never pressing her for details about Sarah or the deep wounds of her past. The dream of the boy with the piercing blue eyes, however, had shaken her carefully constructed solitude. It felt like a crack in the ice, a hint of something warm and vital beneath the frozen surface of her life. She found herself glancing at the calendar, counting the days since the dream. 4 days, 5, 6. Each morning, she woke with a strange sense of anticipation, a nervous flutter in her chest she couldn't explain. She'd dismiss it, reminding herself that dreams were just dreams, ephemeral wisps of the subconscious. But the image of the boy, his laughter, his call of grandma, it was stubbornly persistent, refusing to be relegated to the realm of fantasy. It felt like a prelude, a quiet drumbeat before an unknown arrival. She just didn't know what kind of arrival it would be, or if it would only deepen the solitude she had so carefully cultivated. Chapter 3. The Knock at the Door. A week to the day after the dream, the quiet solitude of Evelyn's home was shattered by a sharp, insistent knocking at her front door. It was an unfamiliar sound, startling in its abruptness. Evelyn rarely had unexpected visitors. Her heart, already on edge from the lingering effects of the dream, leaped into her throat. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A tall, broad-shouldered man stood on her porch, dressed in a dark suit, his face unreadable. Beside him, holding tightly to his hand, was a small boy. Evelyn gasped, a faint, choked sound escaping her lips. It was him, the boy from her dream. The same sandy brown hair, the same delicate features, and those eyes, those astonishing, piercing blue eyes that held an uncanny depth. He was smaller in person, perhaps a little more subdued, but undeniably, unmistakably, the boy from her dream. She fumbled with the locks, her hands trembling, when she opened the door. The man offered a solemn smile. "Mrs. Moore? Evelyn Moore?" he asked, his voice calm, professional. "My name is Detective Robert Gray, with the Chicago Police Department, and this is Noah." Evelyn could only stare, her gaze fixed on the boy, Noah. He looked up at her, his blue eyes wide, a flicker of apprehension in their depths. The scent of salt and sunshine she'd imagined in her dream now seemed to waft from him, a strangely potent detail. "Noah?" she finally managed, her voice barely a whisper. "But how?" Detective Gray's expression softened with a hint of compassion. "Mrs. Moore, I apologize for this unexpected visit. It's about your daughter, Sarah Moore." Evelyn felt a fresh wave of dread. Sarah, what had happened? Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and confusion. "Sarah was arrested 2 days ago in Chicago," the detective explained, his voice low and deliberate. "She's been charged with financial fraud. It's a complex case, but it appears she was involved in a scheme with some individuals, not good people, Mrs. Moore. She's being held without bail." Evelyn swayed slightly, gripping the doorframe for support. Sarah, arrested, fraud. The words hit her like a physical blow, each one a fresh cut. "And Noah?" she asked, her voice cracking. Whose child is he?" Detective Gray paused, his gaze gentle but firm. "Noah is Sarah's son, Mrs. Moore, your grandson. He's 8 years old." The world tilted on its axis. A grandson. Sarah had a son, and she had never told her. The years of silence, the carefully constructed barriers between them, had hidden this profound truth from her. The boy from her dream, the child she had never seen, was real. Her grandson. "Sarah listed you as the only living relative she has," Detective Gray continued, his voice softer now. "With her in custody and no other immediate family, Child Protective Services have placed Noah in our temporary care, but they need a stable, long-term guardian. Given your relation and Sarah's request, you were the natural choice." He gestured vaguely. "We did some background checks. Your home, your history, you're stable. They want to avoid foster care if possible. We drove him out here." Evelyn stared at Noah, then back at the detective, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief, shock, and a strange, overwhelming sense of predestination. The dream, the call of Grandma. It wasn't a fantasy, it was a prophecy. A boy she had never seen, dreamt of, and now here he was, standing on her doorstep, the innocent byproduct of her daughter's hidden life, and a sudden, unexpected anchor in her own. I don't understand," Evelyn stammered, her voice trembling. "Sarah never told me. I didn't know." "I understand this is a lot to take in, Mrs. Moore," Detective Gray said, his gaze sympathetic. "But Noah needs a safe place. He's been through a lot. His mother's arrest was very traumatic for him. He stepped aside, gently urging Noah forward. The boy, still silent, looked up at Evelyn, his piercing blue eyes filled with a mixture of fear and an almost painful vulnerability. Evelyn looked at the child, a stranger who felt impossibly familiar, and then out at the churning ocean, its waves crashing against the rocks below. Her carefully constructed solitary world had just crumbled, swept away by the tide of an unimaginable revelation. The unseen grandson, the boy from her dream, had arrived, and with him a deluge of questions, a torrent of buried emotions, and the terrifying, beautiful prospect of a life she never knew she was meant to live. Chapter 4. A House Unaccustomed to Laughter. Noah stood in Evelyn's living room, a small, still figure amidst the antique furniture and the pervasive scent of old books and sea air. His small backpack lay at his feet, his only possessions in this new, bewildering world. Evelyn, still reeling from Detective Gray's shocking revelation, felt a profound sense of disorientation. Her quiet, meticulously ordered life had been upended by the sudden, undeniable presence of an 8-year-old boy. Her grandson, Detective Gray, had stayed for an hour, patiently explaining the legal process, the temporary custody arrangements, the steps Child Protective Services would take. He assured Evelyn she wouldn't be alone in this, that support would be available. But as he drove away, his patrol car a diminishing hum on the coastal road, Evelyn was left with the overwhelming silence of her home, now punctuated by the quiet breathing of a child she didn't know. She looked at Noah. He hadn't spoken a word since he arrived, his face a mask of solemnity. His piercing blue eyes, the same ones from her dream, now held a deep, unsettling sadness. He was obviously traumatized by his mother's arrest, by the abrupt upheaval of his life. "Noah," Evelyn said, her voice softer than she'd intended, a little rusty from disuse when speaking to children. "Would you like something to eat? Or perhaps to see your room?" Noah simply nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. Evelyn led him upstairs, her heart aching with a strange mix of fear and an unfamiliar tenderness. The guest room, meticulously clean and unused for years, was stark, impersonal. "This will be your room," she explained, gesturing vaguely. "The bathroom is just across the hall." Noah walked in, placed his backpack on the floor, and sat on the edge of the bed, his back perfectly straight, his hands clasped in his lap. He didn't explore, didn't ask questions. He simply sat, waiting. Evelyn realized with a jolt that he was exhibiting the very stillness she herself cultivated in her grief-laden solitude. He was a small, wounded creature, mirroring her own retreat from the world. The first few days were a quiet struggle. Evelyn was a woman accustomed to silence, to her own company. She cooked for one, lived by her own rhythms. Now there was another presence, a fragile, deeply affected one. She tried to make conversation, to draw Noah out, but his responses were minimal, often just a shrug or a nod. She bought him new clothes, toys, books. He thanked her politely, but with a detached formality that broke her heart. He ate his meals silently, played by himself in his room, or sat by the window, staring out at the ocean, his blue eyes distant and unreadable. Evelyn, despite her inexperience with children, tried. She read to him, awkward at first, her voice stumbling over the light-hearted children's stories. She attempted to play board games, but Noah seemed uninterested. She felt a frustrating sense of inadequacy, a fear that she was failing him, just as she felt she had failed Sarah years ago. One afternoon, desperate to connect, Evelyn suggested a walk on the beach. Noah, surprisingly, agreed. They walked in silence, the rhythm of the waves their only companion. Evelyn watched as Noah, cautiously at first, then with increasing curiosity, began to pick up shells, to observe the tiny crabs scuttling across the wet sand. His face, for the first time, showed a flicker of engagement, a hint of the wonder that had captivated the boy in her dream. He picked up a smooth, perfectly curved conch shell, its inner chambers a muted pink. He held it to his ear, listening intently to the ocean's whisper. Then, for the first time since his arrival, he spoke, his voice soft but clear, cutting through the silence of the waves. "It sounds like home," he whispered, his blue eyes finally meeting hers, a glimmer of something fragile, something almost hopeful in their depths. Evelyn felt a jolt. Home, her home. And perhaps, for the first time, Noah was beginning to feel it too. It was a tiny crack in his silence, a fragile bridge across the chasm of his trauma. And in that moment, Evelyn realized that the task before her wasn't just about providing shelter. It was about providing solace, about nurturing a wounded spirit, about creating a true home in a house unaccustomed to laughter, but slowly, tentatively beginning to open its heart. Chapter 5. Unearthing the Past. The word home, whispered by Noah on the beach, was a tiny seed carefully planted in the barren landscape of Evelyn's existence. It was a fragile beginning, but it was a beginning nonetheless. From that day, the silence in the house began to shift, ever so subtly. Noah still spoke little, but he would occasionally ask a question about a shell, a bird, or the distant ships on the horizon. His eyes, though still holding a trace of sadness, began to lose some of their haunted look. Evelyn, in turn, found herself adapting, her carefully constructed routines bending to accommodate the presence of a child. She started cooking meals designed to entice a young palate, read aloud for longer, and found herself anticipating Noah's quiet observations. She learned to sit with his silence, understanding that it was a protective shell, not a rejection. She saw glimpses of the boy from her dream, the keen observation, the quiet thoughtfulness, the surprising depth in his young eyes. As Noah slowly began to uncoil, Evelyn started seeing something else, something both beautiful and profoundly painful. Glimmers of Daniel. Noah had Daniel's quiet intensity when focused on something. The same way Daniel used to concentrate on his art, he had Daniel's gentle hands, the way he carefully handled a seashell or a smooth piece of driftwood. He even had a similar way of tilting his head when listening, a characteristic Evelyn hadn't seen in 2 decades. These echoes of Daniel were a double-edged sword. They brought a sharp pang of the old grief, a fresh wave of what-ifs. But they also brought a strange comfort, a sense of continuity. It was as if a part of Daniel, long lost to her, had returned in the form of his nephew. This unexpected connection to her deceased son through her living grandson was both a wound and a balm. One afternoon, Noah was sketching in a notebook Evelyn had given him, drawing the jagged coastline, the crashing waves. He was remarkably talented for his age, his lines fluid and expressive. Evelyn watched him, a lump forming in her throat. Daniel had drawn like that. "Noah," Evelyn said, her voice soft. "Your Uncle Daniel, he loved to draw the ocean too." Noah looked up, his blue eyes wide. "I have an uncle?" Evelyn's heart ached. Sarah had clearly kept her entire family, including Daniel, a secret from Noah. "Yes, darling, my son, your mother's brother. He passed away a long time ago." Noah's face clouded. "How?" Evelyn hesitated, the old pain a sharp jab. "He drowned, Noah. Out there." She gestured vaguely towards the sea. "It was a terrible accident." Noah was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the ocean. "Did she blame you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Evelyn flinched. The question, direct and piercing, came from a place of deep, intuitive understanding, the kind only a child who had witnessed a parent's fall could possess. "Yes, Noah," Evelyn confessed, her voice thick with emotion. "She did, and perhaps I blamed myself too." Noah nodded slowly, a knowing look on his young face. "Mom always blames herself," he whispered, "for everything." The conversation, brief but profound, was a turning point. It was the first time Noah had truly acknowledged his mother's struggles, and the first time Evelyn had spoken, even fleetingly, about the raw wound that had severed her from Sarah. The shared vulnerability created a fragile bridge between them. The next day, Evelyn found Noah looking at an old photo album, filled with pictures of a smiling, vibrant Daniel. He looked at the boy in the pictures with an almost reverent curiosity. "Grandma," Noah said, looking up at her, "Mom talks about you sometimes. When she's sad, she always says she wishes things were different." Evelyn's heart ached. Wishes things were different. That was an echo of her own lifelong lament. Seeing Daniel's face in Noah, feeling the tender connection to a life she thought was irrevocably lost, fueled a new, urgent need within her. She had to see Sarah. She had to try and mend the chasm that had divided them for so long, for Noah's sake and for her own. The quiet, perceptive boy, her unseen grandson from the dream, was not just a reminder of past pain, but a living bridge to reconciliation, a silent plea for healing. Chapter 6: The Grimy Glass and Shattered Words. The decision to visit Sarah in jail was not an easy one. The thought of seeing her daughter, hardened by life and now by incarceration, filled Evelyn with a fresh wave of dread. But Noah's quiet presence, the echoes of Daniel she saw in his eyes, and the understanding that this fragile boy was the innocent casualty of their broken relationship, gave her a strength she hadn't known she possessed. She called Detective Gray, who arranged the visit. The drive to the correctional facility was long, the landscape outside the car window a blur. Evelyn's stomach churned with a mixture of fear and a desperate, almost naive hope. The visiting room was stark, impersonal. A long, sterile table, a grimy glass partition, and two uncomfortable chairs. Then Sarah walked in. She looked gaunt, her face pale, her once bright eyes dulled by exhaustion and despair. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, and she wore a drab, shapeless uniform. She looked nothing like the vibrant young woman who had once loved Daniel with such ferocity. Evelyn felt a sharp pang of pain. This was her daughter, reduced to this. Sarah sat down, her gaze flat, avoiding Evelyn's eyes. "Hello, Mom," she said, her voice raspy, devoid of emotion. "Sarah," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling, I saw Noah. He's with me, at the house." Sarah flinched, a flicker of something, perhaps shame, crossing her face. "I know," she mumbled. "Detective Gray told me. Thank you." The gratitude felt mechanical, forced. "Why, Sarah?" Evelyn asked, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" Why did you hide him?" Sarah finally met her gaze, and Evelyn saw the raw pain hidden beneath the hardened exterior. "Because I was ashamed, Mom," Sarah hissed, her voice low and venomous. "Ashamed of my life. Ashamed of myself. I didn't want him to be like me, like us." She gestured vaguely between them. "I didn't want him to be touched by the mess, the grief, the way we were." "What mess, Sarah?" Evelyn pressed, her heart aching. "What grief?" "Daniel, Mom," Sarah burst out, her voice rising, drawing a sharp look from a guard. She lowered it, but her words were still laced with bitterness. "Everything. The way you shut down. The way I couldn't reach you. I felt like I lost both of you that day. First Daniel to the sea, then you to your grief. I didn't want Noah to be lost too. I wanted to protect him from all of it." A profound silence descended, heavy with years of unspoken words. Evelyn looked at her daughter, at the raw, festering wound that had never healed. Sarah blamed her, yes, but she also blamed herself. The burden of guilt, unspoken and unresolved, had festered for 2 decades, shaping Sarah's life, leading her down a path of self-destruction and secrecy. "Sarah," Evelyn began, her voice soft but firm, "I shut down because I was broken. I couldn't breathe. I was drowning in my own grief. I couldn't save Daniel, and I felt I couldn't save myself. And you were so angry. I didn't know how to reach you either." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "I'm so sorry, darling. I'm so sorry for the pain I caused you, for not being there for you, for not helping you through your own grief." Sarah stared at her, her eyes wide, a flicker of surprise, then something akin to disbelief on her face. Evelyn had never apologized, never admitted fault. For 20 years, their conversations had been a dance around the gaping wound of Daniel's death. "I tried to protect him, Mom," Sarah whispered, her voice cracking now, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I didn't want him to have the same sadness, the same empty space." "He doesn't have to, Sarah," Evelyn said, reaching out to touch the grimy glass partition, her fingers hovering inches from her daughter's. "We can heal this, all of us, for Noah and for Daniel." Sarah broke down, her shoulders shaking, silent sobs racking her slender frame. It was a raw, guttural release of years of pent-up pain, guilt, and resentment. Evelyn watched, tears streaming down her own face, the distance between them suddenly feeling impossibly vast, yet paradoxically shrinking with every tear. The glass partition felt like a symbol of their shattered relationship, but through the broken words, a fragile thread of understanding, a sliver of hope, was beginning to weave itself. The unseen grandson, Noah, had not only arrived, he had become the unexpected catalyst, forcing them to confront the devastating past, to begin the painful, necessary work of reconciliation, and to find the echoes of forgiveness that had been lost for far too long. Chapter 7. The Bridge of Understanding. The jail visit was a turning point. The grimy glass partition, once a symbol of their profound separation, became a strange conduit for a truth long suppressed. Sarah's raw vulnerability, her confession of shame, and her desire to protect Noah from the mess of their family resonated deeply with Evelyn. She understood now that Sarah's anger had been a shield, a desperate attempt to cope with a grief that had consumed them both. The conversation had been brutal, exhausting, but utterly necessary. It had cracked open the hardened shell of their estranged relationship, exposing the raw, aching wound beneath. Evelyn left the prison feeling both drained and strangely liberated. The path to reconciliation would be long, filled with thorny patches, but at least, for the first time in 2 decades, a path existed. Back home, Evelyn looked at Noah with new eyes. He wasn't just her grandson. He was a living bridge, a tangible link to a past that had broken them, and a fragile hope for a future that could heal them. His quiet nature, once a source of concern, now seemed a profound reflection of the silent burdens he had witnessed. Evelyn began to speak to Noah more openly about Daniel. She showed him old photo albums, pointing out Daniel's bright smile, his mischievous eyes. She told him stories of Daniel's childhood, his love for the ocean, his passion for drawing. She spoke of the terrible accident, not with bitterness, but with a gentle sorrow, explaining the raw grief that had consumed her and Sarah. Noah listened, his blue eyes absorbing every word. He asked questions, thoughtful, perceptive questions that revealed his innate understanding of human emotion. "Mom always cries when she talks about him," he'd say softly. "She misses him." It was a simple observation, but it held the weight of an 8-year-old's empathy. Through these shared stories, Noah's own silence began to lift. He started drawing more, not just landscapes, but figures, faces, expressions. He drew Daniel, a boy with Evelyn's eyes, soaring over the ocean. He drew Sarah, her face etched with sadness, holding a small hand. He drew Evelyn, her face softened by a smile, holding his own hand. His artwork became a visual diary of his processing of the family's complex emotional landscape. Evelyn also made sure Noah understood that his mother loved him fiercely, despite her circumstances. They wrote letters to Sarah in prison, filled with Noah's drawings and Evelyn's gentle updates on his progress. Sarah, in her replies, haltingly expressed her own love for Noah and a hesitant, almost fragile gratitude towards Evelyn. The letters, though brief and carefully worded, were tiny threads beginning to reweave the fabric of their fractured family. One evening, as Evelyn watched Noah sketching by the window, the setting sun painting streaks of orange and purple across the sky, she had a profound realization about her dream. The boy from her dream wasn't just a premonition of Noah's arrival. He was an embodiment of her deepest, unacknowledged need for connection, for love, for a future unburdened by past grief. The dream was a subconscious call for healing, a vision of the solace that awaited her if she opened her heart. Noah, her unseen grandson, was the living answer to that call. He was not just a child she was caring for. He was the catalyst for her own emotional resurrection. He had forced her to confront the past, to reach out to Sarah, to break the decades of silence. In caring for him, Evelyn was, in a way, caring for her own wounded inner child, healing the parts of herself that had shut down after Daniel's death. Her quiet home, once a sanctuary of solitude, was now filled with the gentle sounds of a child's presence, the rustle of turning pages, the quiet murmur of conversation, the occasional, precious burst of laughter. It wasn't the boisterous home of her youth, but it was a home nonetheless, infused with a new purpose, a new warmth. The bridge of understanding, though still under construction, was slowly, steadily being built, spanning the chasm of grief and resentment. And Noah, the boy with the piercing blue eyes, stood firmly on that bridge, his hand extended, guiding his grandmother and mother towards a reconciliation they never thought possible, a testament to the unexpected paths love takes to find its way home. Chapter 8. The seasons turned, and Noah settled more deeply into Evelyn's home, into her life, and into her heart. The initial stiffness between them had long since melted, replaced by a comfortable intimacy forged in shared experiences. Their walks on the beach became a daily ritual, Noah eagerly pointing out interesting shells or spotting distant seals, Evelyn listening patiently, her gaze often resting on the horizon, no longer searching for answers in the waves, but simply appreciating the quiet companionship. Noah thrived under Evelyn's gentle care. His initial sadness gave way to a quiet confidence, his natural curiosity blossoming. He continued to draw, his sketchbook a chronicle of his developing world, his understanding of himself and his family. He excelled in school, his teachers remarking on his thoughtful nature and insightful questions. Evelyn, watching him, often felt a surge of pride, a familiar feeling from her days as a young mother, a feeling she thought she had buried forever. The letters to Sarah in prison continued. They grew longer, less stilted, filled with Noah's detailed accounts of his days and Evelyn's observations, her hesitant expressions of care. Sarah's replies, too, began to change. The bitterness, while still present, was often tempered by expressions of love for Noah and a tentative, almost fragile gratitude towards Evelyn. There were even occasional mentions of Daniel, no longer laced with blame, but with a quiet sorrow, a shared remembrance. Evelyn continued to visit Sarah regularly. The grimy glass partition remained a physical barrier, but the emotional distance between them was slowly, painstakingly shrinking. Their conversations shifted from updates on Noah to shared memories, to tentative discussions about their feelings, their regrets. It was a slow, painful thaw, chipping away at 2 decades of frozen silence and hardened resentment. One visit, Sarah spoke about Daniel, her voice soft. I always felt like if I could just have protected him, just once, maybe he wouldn't have gone out there. Maybe he'd still be here. Tears welled in her eyes. I know it's not your fault, Mom. I couldn't bear it. Evelyn reached out, pressing her palm against the glass, aligning it with Sarah's. I know, darling, she whispered, tears streaming down her own face. I know. We both wished we could have saved him. We both blamed ourselves. It was just too much. For the first time, they truly acknowledged their shared trauma, their shared burden of grief and guilt. There were no grand pronouncements of forgiveness, no dramatic apologies, just the quiet, agonizing recognition of a mutual wound and the unspoken understanding that they were both victims of a loss too immense to bear alone. It was a moment of profound, quiet healing, a testament to the slow, persistent power of love to erode even the deepest cracks. Evelyn found herself rediscovering parts of herself she thought were long lost. Her laughter, once a rare, brittle sound, became more frequent, genuine, often prompted by Noah's innocent observations or playful antics. Her house, once a silent mausoleum of grief, was now alive with the gentle hum of a child's presence, the warmth of a renewed connection. She realized the profound, almost mystical significance of her dream. It wasn't just a premonition. It was a divine intervention, a message from her subconscious, or perhaps even from Daniel himself. That love and family were still possible, that healing awaited her if she dared to open her heart. The boy from her dream, the unseen grandson, had been the key, unlocking decades of pain and silence, leading her back to a life she never knew she was meant to have. The ocean outside her window, once a symbol of her solitude and loss, now seemed to murmur a different tune, a song of resilience, of tides turning, of new beginnings. The slow thaw had begun, promising a spring of healing and hope, guided by the innocent hand of a boy who had arrived from a dream and brought an entire family back to life. Chapter 9: The Returning Tide. Years rolled on, marked by the steady rhythm of Noah's growth and the gradual mending of fractured bonds. Sarah's legal journey was arduous, but with Evelyn's unwavering support and the knowledge that Noah was thriving, she found the strength to face her consequences. Upon her release, much later, her first destination was Evelyn's house in Maine. The reunion was tentative, filled with a fragile awkwardness, but beneath it lay a newfound understanding, a quiet gratitude that transcended years of pain. Noah, now a thoughtful teenager, was the bridge that united them. He understood the complexities of his family, the weight of their past, but he was also a beacon of their future. He saw his mother not just as a figure of past disappointment, but as a woman striving for redemption. He saw his grandmother not just as a solitary figure, but as a loving, resilient matriarch who had opened her heart and home. Evelyn's home, once a haven of solitude, had truly become a bustling hub of family life. Sarah, humbled by her experiences, began the slow process of rebuilding her life, finding purpose in helping others who had faced similar struggles. She often spoke about Evelyn's unwavering support, her mother's ability to forgive and offer a second chance, as the foundation of her own recovery. The dream of the unseen grandson became a cherished family legend, recounted often around the dinner table, a testament to the strange, beautiful ways fate weaves its patterns. Evelyn would tell the story, her voice filled with wonder, of the boy with the piercing blue eyes who called her grandma in a dream, only to appear on her doorstep a week later. It was a story that spoke of hope, of unexpected blessings, and the profound, transformative power of connection. Evelyn, in her later years, found a profound sense of completeness. Her grief for Daniel, while never entirely absent, no longer consumed her. It had transformed into a gentle, enduring love, woven into the fabric of her renewed family. She saw Daniel's spark in Noah's keen intellect, in his love for the ocean, in his kind spirit. The sorrow of losing a son had, unexpectedly, led to the joy of gaining a grandson and a reconciliation with her daughter. Her days were filled with the warmth of family, the laughter of children, the quiet satisfaction of a life rediscovered. She walked the beach daily, but now often with Noah or with Sarah by her side. The ocean, once a symbol of loss and isolation, had become a testament to the returning tide, the tide of love, of healing, of family. Its rhythmic sighs were no longer mournful, but a soothing lullaby, a melody of peace. The love she felt for Noah was unlike any she had ever known, perhaps even deeper than the fiercely protective love she had for her own children. It was a love born of vulnerability, of unexpected arrival, of a dream made real. He was the child who brought light back into her darkened world, the catalyst for a profound spiritual awakening. The unseen grandson, who had haunted her dream and then arrived on her doorstep, had brought with him not just a new life, but a new purpose, a new family. He was the embodiment of forgiveness, the living proof that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that love in its most unexpected forms can always find its way home. The returning tide had brought back more than just the ocean's bounty. It had brought back Evelyn's heart, full and whole again. Chapter 10: The Unfolding Horizon. In the twilight of her life, Evelyn Moore often sat by her window, overlooking the vast expanse of the Atlantic, her heart filled with a profound and quiet contentment. The ocean, her constant companion through decades of solitude and grief, now reflected a horizon of peace, boundless and full of promise. Noah, now a young man pursuing his passion for marine biology at a university just a few hours away, was a constant source of pride and joy. He visited frequently, his piercing blue eyes still holding that familiar depth, but now also shining with purpose and the boundless energy of youth. He often brought his own sketches, sharing his observations of the ocean's intricate ecosystems, a love for the sea that mirrored both his grandmother's deep connection to it and his Uncle Daniel's artistic soul. Sarah, her daughter, had fully rebuilt her life. She was a successful advocate for women transitioning out of the correctional system, channeling her own past struggles into a powerful force for good. Her relationship with Evelyn had blossomed into a rare, beautiful friendship built on a foundation of shared history, mutual forgiveness, and an unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of loss and reconciliation. They no longer spoke of blame or regret, but of gratitude for the journey that had brought them back to each other. The story of Evelyn's dream, of Noah's arrival, had woven itself into the very fabric of their family lore. It was a testament to the unexpected paths life takes, to the unseen forces that guide us, and to the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. For Evelyn, the dream was no longer just a premonition. It was a profound spiritual experience, a whisper from the universe that her heart, though broken, was still capable of immense love, and that life, even after unimaginable loss, could still offer miraculous new beginnings. She had found a peace she never believed possible. The gnawing guilt over Daniel's death had finally receded, replaced by the comforting presence of Noah, a living echo of her son, a testament to life's continuity. She had learned that grief doesn't disappear, but transforms, becoming a part of the tapestry of who you are, making you more compassionate, more understanding, more deeply connected to the preciousness of every moment. Her home, once silent save for the ocean's sigh, now resonated with the lively chatter of family gatherings, the footsteps of grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Evelyn's solitude had given way to connection, her isolation to belonging. She was no longer just a lonely old woman by the sea. She was a cherished matriarch, a survivor, a beacon of hope. Her life a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. As she looked out at the ocean, its waves rolling endlessly towards the shore, Evelyn understood that her journey had truly come full circle. The tide had taken something precious from her, but it had also, miraculously, brought something new, something profoundly beautiful, back to her shore. The unseen grandson, who had entered her life from a dream, had not only filled her empty house, he had filled her empty heart, unfolding a horizon of love and purpose that stretched as far as the eye could see, as vast and comforting as the ocean itself. Her life, once marked by loss, was now truly whole, a testament to the enduring power of a dream and the ultimate grace of an unexpected arrival.